You're listening to the Faith and Other Oddities podcast, brought to you by the Raven Creek Social Club, where we talk about faith and other oddities. For questions, comments, or to be part of the conversation, join us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, where you can find us at Raven Creek SC. Now for your hosts, Emily Dixon and Nathan Underwood.
But you and Mickey went out to dinner last night.
Yeah, we went out to. So we're a little late, and it'll be way late by the time this airs. But our anniversary was in December. This is January 6th. So last night we went out. But it's over Christmas break, which was great when it was just the two of us. We could still get anniversary celebration in there, but.
And then you poorly planned a daughter's birthday.
We didn't plan anything with that one. Well, that's probably too much information, but our youngest, her birthday's in the break as well. So now you have anniversary and Christmas and a birthday. And that's, Christmas with her family and Christmas with our family.
Trying to work out all the logistics. Who
trying
needs to be where.
Yeah, trying to work all the logistics, and it was a little easier, when both the fathers were alive, because you could just switch holidays, but now that there's single moms involved, you kind of feel like you have to be at each one and do something. So that kind of changed things, but. Yeah, so that was, like I said, it was just the two of us. It was fine. But when you throw in the logistics of just having children over the holidays, let alone one of them having a birthday right over the break, that really gets a little crazy.
The anniversary gets sacrificed.
Yeah, and so we delayed, and you were in town, so free babysitter. We were able to go have a nice dinner. So we went to a place called Sear. As in seared things, like not seer, not like a prophetic thing, but like SEAR.
Not everything has a biblical tie-in.
No,
is what you're telling us.
Not everything, but it was really good. I have never. We had so for the people going to Norman, it's really good. It's it's a little on the pricey side, but it's locally owned. And I say on the pricey side, it's not pricey for what it is. Mm-hmm. It's very well done food. It's good food, and it's priced appropriately for what it is. But I was really impressed. We started out with I know everyone wants to know this, but we started out with these salmon croquettes that were delicious. The sauce was amazing.
I figured it had to be because y'all were like looking up the recipe online.
We're looking up the recipe for this sauce, trying to find out if we can kind of recreate something similar. And then we had lamb loin chops with
mushrooms,
mushroom risotto, and it was so good. And it was really interesting though, because I tried the risotto and I was like, it's good. And then I took a bite of lamb. And the lamb was amazing. Like, it was so perfectly done that it was just tender, juicy, melt in your mouth lamb. And then I took another bite of the risotto, and it tasted like 10 times better. So it was like the flavor pairing. That was really, really good.
And that's huge in making it a successful dish. I mean, not that I can do it on my own, but I have enough friends who cook well.
Oh my goodness, yeah, your friend Sarah, who's the chef. She was cooking at a restaurant it's now the restaurant's out of business. She left before it closed, so it wasn't her cooking that closed
right.
it down. I got to say, it was just the owners decided they were.
It's a long story, but yeah,
decided they were done with it.
And we're really sad about that.
And they were really So and we're really sad about it. But no, Mickey and I went there one year because we were visiting family on Christmas break. It's and. We ordered an appetizer, and then there was Sarah knew we were eating there, so she sent out compliments of the chef. Mm-hmm. 2 deviled eggs.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, well, that's an interesting thing to just send out. But oh my goodness, that was the best deviled eggs I've ever had in my life. And now here's the thing. Just before that, I had the deviled eggs that our Aunt Patricia made.
And she's a good cook.
And she's a good cook.
Uh-huh.
But she had done like these avocado deviled eggs that year, and those were really good. And no offense to our aunt, but holy cow. Like I didn't think a deviled egg could be that good. So
No, Sarah is amazing because there for a while on my birthday, she would make me something, and she would come up with something that was perfect. And I know we're going on and on again, but the one thing she made me, because my birthday is on St. Patrick's Day, so green's kind of a theme. She made me basil ice cream, and that sounds so insane. And I don't even like ice cream. I like ice cream, but I'm not like an ice cream fanatic. And a lot of times I'll just bypass it.
Right.
I ate like 2.5, 3 bowls of the stuff because it was that good. And it's like, leave it to Sarah, but she's won all these awards and everything. So we're like major food snobs in some ways.
Yeah.
And so when y'all guys came home and Mickey's like, I was going to save you a piece of the lamb, but yeah. And so y'all were raving. Now I've got to go, and
you'll have to check it out sometime. And it's not Italian, so you could take Thai there.
Yeah.
It's, I
have to use dynamite to get him, this direction because he doesn't leave the house.
Get him out of his chair. But so we made a crucial mistake while recording, and that is we started talking about food.
Now you're hungry.
And no, not that now. It's not even that. It's like we could. This whole show could just be about food. Because of how much we love food.
Well, yeah.
Well, when Mickey and I travel anywhere, people are like, "What are you going to do?" And I'm like, I feel like we've talked about this before.
Maybe.
But I'm just like, I'm always like, well, we're going to go to this restaurant, and if there's time, we'll go maybe to this museum.
Well, and we don't, and you and I know you and Mickey do this too. We tend to shy away from the chains. We look for just what's going to be local, and we are often pleasantly surprised by places most of our friends wouldn't even go to.
Oh yeah. That's actually, I tend to ask, like at the hotels, like where would you send someone for this type of food that's not a restaurant? It's not a chain. Concierge usually knows. But yeah. Fantastic food out here in Norman, and we're actually looking at possibly, let us know if you're interested in this. Here's the deal. We're possibly, we just launched the Patreon. We're possibly going to go with a level of support that is this. I'm not going to give you how much yet. We're going to see if it's possible. We got to look at kind of some rules and stuff. But it's going to be, if you contribute a certain level, then you have the option to come to Norman, and we'll spend the day with you at either the art museum, the natural history museum, the zoo, science museum, something. We'll go do something fun. That's my idea of fun. Museums are fun to me. So if there's something else you'd rather do, that's totally cool too.
And if it's legal.
It has to be legal and moral. And then we will, they're not always synonymous.
True.
But then we'll go out and we'll have dinner and just have a good time. And, so we're working on that. We're looking to see if that's something that we can do through Patreon. Now you have to provide your own transportation here, but we will take you to where the food is. And we might include 2 restaurants on that. We'll just have to,
one at the beginning and one at the end. I mean,
we'll start at lunch and then go have dinner.
I was actually going to go the other way. And like, if you want to get us to come speak at any of your events, just promise us good food, and that's going to go a long way.
That will go a long way.
Making up our mind.
Oh yeah. And that is something, Emily and I are available for speaking. If you're interested in some of the topics, I generally will probably talk more about worship. And that's more of my background as time as a musician and a worship leader. And then Emily, of course, can talk about anything.
Just give me enough prep time.
Yeah, just give her. Yeah, exactly. And and there are some other topics that I will cover, but generally I like to talk about worship because I feel like that's an important part of Christian life that we sometimes overlook.
Well, I don't think we just overlook it. Don't think we understand it.
Or misemphasize might be better. But that's not what this show is about. But we kind of got off track. Again, we made the crucial mistake of starting the show talking about food. So
we love our food.
We love our food, and we hope you do too. And again, and even here's the other thing. If you happen to be in town, we might not do a crazy thing, but if you happen to be in Norman sometime, hit us up. We'll be glad to go grab coffee or even dinner sometime. Especially if you want to support us by paying for that while you're in town. But I'm kidding. So we will be glad to sit down and have coffee, have a chat. But yeah, hit us up through the page. Let us know when you're going to be in town. If we're available, we might hook up. So there's that. Oh, that was a little loud. Sorry. So there's that. But we've got a show planned.
We actually do. And we're picking up where we left off last week, where we were talking about the binding of Isaac. And we kind of went through the story and looked at some of the high points on that. And this week, what we want to do is we want to look at the chiastic structure, which we looked at with Hagar and Ishmael for their story. And then we're going to put the two together and we're going to see how they play off each other. And I love this because I didn't realize there was this much connection. And
until I asked a question.
Yeah. Yeah. Questions are dangerous because you and I both will do this. If somebody asks a question, we have a tendency to just like, I've got to know the answer now.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah. And so yeah, I want to look, I'm curious now. And if I'm kind of regretful though that I asked the question because I found out the answer is a chiastic structure. And I say that jokingly. I understand what it is, but it's really hard. It's hard to go through those and keep them interesting because it feels like you're just lining up bullet points. So, if you're not, it seems like, if you're someone who like to do like puzzles, it might be a lot more fun, but I'm not a puzzle person.
Well, and I think if we could do this visually, it would be easier too. And I know we're on YouTube, but we got so many podcast listeners that I think it would be really difficult to.
Yeah, we don't want to deprive the podcast crowd, and maybe we can have like a video eventually for like a special edition or something. We can come back to it, but
because there's really not that many points, and I deliberately now this could like expand out, but I deliberately tried to keep it short. Matter of fact, there's 3 points for each leg of the chiasm, thank you. Yes, and then the y-axis. Now it could it could spread out, but I wanted to, because we are just talking about this.
Yeah.
I thought that was a good number to kind of stop with. And really there are people who've gone through and done entire books, and not just like within the book. I'm talking between the books.
Oh yeah.
And so it gets really involved, and so we're just giving you a little taste. If this is something...
Is the chiastic structure, you saying like that spans multiple books?
Books.
Now, is that something you think is intentional, or do you think that's something that's imposed?
Yes.
Because here's the thing. I would say if you're going to do that, because the Jewish Bible's in a different order than the English Bible. So are the people doing that? Are they using English Bibles? Are they using, are you getting into like Bible code stuff?
Well, and that's the thing. I think we'd have to look at each case individually, because I think sometimes people can see it and it's just jumping out at them. And then I think other times we're reaching too far.
Sure.
And I like those little nuggets that, kind of stick out. And I think that's something I try to guard against with me, not reaching too far and not trying to, but yeah, like and you mentioned the Bible code. The Bible code, you can do that formula with any book.
With any text. Yeah. You can put Shakespeare in it. And
yeah. So so the part of me is going like, really don't care.
I don't know if it would work with Dr. Seuss though.
Somebody ought to try that.
Please, if you have the technology, please put in this algorithm and show us what the Seuss says.
What the
soothsayer.
We find ourselves way too amusing. But yeah, because And one of the things that Heiser points out is the people who did the Bible code aren't even using the oldest Hebrew text.
Yeah, they're using like the one with the vowels and everything.
Yeah, so that's suspect to me. I think there's some interesting things that are pretty obvious that come out of it.
Mhm.
But there's some other things that, people have just really went out of their way to try to impose upon the scripture, as you put it. So,
So we're starting in what, 20 again?
we're in 22.
22.
And we're actually starting with verse 1. So that makes it easy. Yeah. Julie Andrews.
Start at the very beginning.
It's a very good place to start. So, okay. So God calls Abraham in verse 1, and he says, Abram, and immediately Abraham says, Hanani. And we talked about the importance of that in last week. That's, I'm here, I'm present, and there's this agreement. I'm going to go along with whatever you have to say, even though I haven't heard it.
Mm-hmm.
And so Abraham says Hanani, and that's verse 1, and we're just jumping right into the chiastic structure here. If you look at verse 11, this is when Abraham has the knife drawn.
Okay.
And God says Hanani. God says Abram, and Abraham says Hanani.
Okay.
So we have that repeated. If we go down to verse 2, we've got God tells Abraham, take your son, offer him as a sacrifice in the place that I will tell you. In verses 9 and 10, the son is taken. There's the attempt to make him the sacrifice in the place where God told Abraham to go. So we're starting to get some lineup. Verse 6, and I kind of mentioned this last time, he took the wood, he bound it, he placed it on Isaac, and they went together. Now this is the key phrase. They went together.
Right.
And in verse 7 and 8, we're talking about the wood. We got Isaac is still carrying the wood, and they're still going together.
Uh-huh.
And so this is important because this happens in the middle of the conversation. I said that was the only conversation that Isaac and Abraham ever had.
Mm-hmm.
And Isaac actually says, Father, and Abraham's response is Hanani, which is totally counter to what we saw with Hagar.
Right.
And this is the center axis of the story. And this has become, a lot of the sages, when they would begin to discuss this, they said this was the power of Abraham, that he could say Hanani to God without any hesitation, but he could still be present in the moment. And when his son calls on him, his response is an automatic Hanani.
Well, that's interesting because that actually that reminds me of, that we have that saying, don't be so heavenly minded that you're no earthly good.
Mm-hmm.
Where, saying, don't get so caught up in your religious practice, in your cultic practice of your religion, that you leave out the practical implications of what you should be doing, with your fellow humans.
Well, and whenever Abraham's walking up this mountain, and you say Isaac is a child, and he is 7 or 8, and we don't know, like we talked about last week, we don't know how old he was.
Mm-hmm.
And here's a kid, Father. What's the last thing you want to hear when you know what you're getting ready to do? You don't want that relationship. You don't want it at the uppermost level of your consciousness. I would think that you would want to kind of separate and distance yourself.
Sure. Well, and going back to commentarians, where you talked about where you all watched Hannibal, or the Silence of the Lambs, talking about Hannibal and talking about how killers dehumanize people.
Right.
And so at this point, we're having Isaac saying, Father, you talked about the senator, congresswoman in the movie keeps saying the daughter's name in the television, so that the killer will have to hear their name and think of them as a person. I know that's kind of a weird parallel here, but you've got Abraham who is about to have to sacrifice his son. So he's probably in his mind trying to make himself think of Isaac as an animal or as a lamb.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have Isaac saying, Father, and and bringing that back in.
Yeah, drawing him right back to that moment.
So,
And Abraham acknowledges, because he says, "Here I am, my son,"
mhm.
and he allows himself to be in that moment with Isaac. And I think, like you said, that whole spiritually minded, no earthly good, it's a heavenly minded.
Mhm.
I that's a temptation.
I know. I get it. It'd be much easier to cloister ourselves away with books and not ever interact with anyone.
That would be wonderful.
So,
No, but
we have enough Patreon supporters. We might. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. That's not our goal. We are here to help and interact. But but I, you also kind of parallel that with, and I don't know if this is where you're going, but you contrast that with Hagar,
Mhm.
and this goes back to my original question of whenever she thinks her son is going to die, what did she say to the angel? She said, just don't make me watch my son die.
Yeah.
And that's,
Well, yeah, we're going to kind of get to that, because I think it's very interesting too in this part where Abraham, for the first time, calls Isaac his son.
Mhm.
And so with Hagar, who there was this relationship with Ishmael, and so much to the point that Ishmael was mirroring Hagar's own behavior towards Sarah and Isaac,
Mhm.
with the mocking and the taunting. Then, so they have a deep relationship, and here Abraham doesn't seem to have much of a relationship,
right.
and yet in this moment of crisis, there's a flip for both of them. On one, it's good, and for one, it's not so good. So there are actually 15 different points that line up these stories together, and I didn't go into all 15 of them.
Right.
But I wanted to show you why they're back to back. And this is where, I know we talked about this before, but I have to harp on it. We cannot just read scripture in isolation. You need the context. Hey, I'm going to knock some points off your grade.
I got my phone out. Sorry.
But-
It's hey, speaking of Joe, he's asking about the Silence of the Lambs episode.
Oh,
So that's kind of funny. But we'll
so-
get to that later. Sorry.
gotta wait, Joe. Yeah. So but there's 15 points that connect it, and you've got to read both the stories together to see that.
Right.
And I think even if you didn't sit down and make a list, if you read even the binding with the expulsion of Ishmael on, fresh on your mind, then you're going to be seeing some of these things just naturally and not necessarily having to go through a point by point dissection.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Sometimes.
No, it does. I mean, because we do tend to read so much in isolation.
Particularly our Bible.
Particularly, I mean, yeah. Well, I meant
Almost exclusively our Bible.
I meant that's what I meant. We tend to read the Bible so much. I missed a word. It as though it was written in a vacuum, as though it was just handed down, regardless of what was going on culturally, and like God's just kind of like, I don't want to know what's going on over there. Here, do this.
Right.
I mean,
and yet we have this as, it's funny because we have the exact opposite thing with Sodom. He goes down to investigate, and
Mhm.
the Bible makes a very strong point of, he didn't just do that. He
Right.
was actually there on the scene. So, but it's kind of some of the points that tie this together is, if you look at both stories, Abraham wakes up early in the morning with both of them.
Mhm.
And so there's this, why was he up early in the morning? Was it because he was upset? Was it because it's just like, let's just get this over with? He didn't
Mhm.
sleep the night before. These are all questions that when you're reading the Bible, you may not get a specific answer, but it helps put yourself back in the text and
Sure.
and to think about what your attitude or your thought process might be if you were Abraham. Obviously, the stories are connected because there's the near death of both of his sons.
Right.
Both of them begin with a command from God
Mhm.
that you're supposed to do this, and they both end with an angelic intervention. That's the word. I've got it written here, and I still couldn't say it.
So, well, it's because you're handwriting. Sorry.
Words for that, but okay.
Yeah. Well, and then So we're still under the compare.
Yeah, we're on the comparison of the two of them.
No, but we haven't got to contrast yet.
Yeah, we haven't got to contrast yet.
Okay.
What derailment? Yes, we haven't got to contrast yet. But almost, yeah. So, because you got to start with the similar points, so then you can find the different points. Each child almost dies in the presence of one parent, while the other parent is oblivious. So Hagar, it was with Ishmael. Abraham's not there. Abraham's with Isaac, but Sarah's not there. Because can you imagine? I think about that for a moment. As a mom, and the father comes in and says, "Hey, honey, I'm taking the kid out to the mountain for a few days because God told."
That wouldn't bother me so much. But now, if you'd finish the sentence like, because God told me to sacrifice it.
Yeah.
It depends on have I had my coffee yet? I'm kidding. I love my kids. I joke too much about them. I shouldn't joke that much about them because we don't harm them. They're not abused. We love them so much.
These kids are so self-confident that.
But they're kids and they're active.
Informed me last night. I was bad with the baby wipes. I was wiping off her hands, and I was. So she's not timid or scared. She's
not at all. She's funny. She cracks me up.
But okay, because Sarah's never brought up in this story at all. I mean, she's not present, and you got to wonder: did Abraham? Did he tell her he was leaving, or did he just grab Isaac up and run?
I would imagine he probably said he was going to go. Now here's actually kind of funny. I just put this together. Abraham says, "Hey, we're going to go," and he walks 3 days into the wilderness. What is it? Later on, we get an Exodus. What does Moses say? We need to go travel 3 days into the wilderness so we can sacrifice to our God.
See,
I mean, it's I just realized that there's the parallel there. So yeah, that's kind of crazy.
And it's all over the Bible. And that's the thing. There's no replacement for going over these stories over and over again until you do have these little things that pop out where when you read one, it's like, oh yeah, I remember that from this.
Yeah. And what's really funny is I actually didn't realize that Moses had asked to just go out to sacrifice originally. We always think of Charlton Heston, "Let my people go,"
And we'll have to get into some of this because then we got the question, was Moses lying to Pharaoh? Was God lying to Moses? Who's lying to who? Is there a lie? And how do you reconcile that? So this actually poses a huge problem.
Right.
In the rabbinic community, there was debate after debate after debate. How do you deal with this?
Right.
And that's one of the things I do love about the Jewish literature. They didn't go, oh, well, no, they hit it head on, and they're willing to fight and discuss and pick it apart. And I think so often in Christian circles we just go, so moving on. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and there's another podcast that I listen to that they do it does involve some atheists in talking about Christianity, and it's, to me, it's very frustrating because they obviously aren't listening to any good Christian teachers, because they talk about, well, anytime you bring up the problem of evil, they're like, oh, look at these, I'm going to jingle my keys. And it's like, no, that's not what happens whenever you actually listen to legitimate teachers.
Right. I think that, some of us are willing to go there.
Yeah.
We may not have great answers, but we're willing to try to come up with some good questions.
Mm-hmm. But that's a whole nother topic. But yeah, I'm sorry. I just when I realized that, I was like, hey, that's an interesting parallel, that the 3 days into the wilderness.
And the 3 days obviously comes up again later too. So
it's like it's an important number.
Yeah. Imagine that. But here's the part that I think a lot of us don't notice is both children have wood over them at some point. Because what does Hagar do? She casts Ishmael under the bush, under the thorn bush.
Okay, yeah.
And so, and that word cast there is actually the same word where Abraham sends his hand out to slay Isaac. So those two words actually play together in the Hebrew.
Yeah, thorn bush.
Another parallel with Moses. It's in here. And the problem is, it's not what can I come up with to teach about.
Let's say the ram caught in the thorns.
And we got the ram caught in the
Mhm.
thorns, which that's interesting. I don't think I brought this up. Isaac asked, "Where's the lamb?"
What I think is funny is when they go up the mountain, he's like, "Wait, where's the lamb?" And it's like kind of like, are we gonna have to go back?
Yeah. Dad, you forgot something. And the thing was, it wouldn't be just down the mountain. It would be
3 days
back. And we both know what our dad's response would be to that. So
I hate when I leave my sheep at the house. You know?
random biblical problems. That could be a t-shirt. But Isaac asked about a lamb, and it's not a lamb that they find, it's a ram.
Mhm.
That's a significant difference.
Right.
And it's caught by its horns. Well,
Mhm.
what do horns represent?
Strength.
Strength and power. Why does Christ have to go on to be sacrificed? Because he's the only one with the strength and the power to accomplish that. And so it's ultimately his strength and power that quote unquote catch him.
Right.
And so that comes into play. And Hannah, in her prophecy about the Messiah, which we're going to find when we get there,
Oh yeah, that's gonna be
talks
awesome.
about the horn of God's anointed, and anointed is Messiah or Christos, Christ.
Mhm.
So we could spend days just like that. Like I said, that beautiful mind map with here's the string from here and there. So anyhow, so there's the wood aspect of it. In each account, both parents receive supernatural sight because Hagar, God opens her eyes.
Yep.
And she sees the well. Abraham, and then we kind of hinted at this last episode, he sees the ram that is behind him.
Mhm.
And so in rabbinic lit, whenever you see this, what they talk about is Abraham at this point in his obedience has,
Sorry, we have an intruder. All right, so what were we talking about? we had a child interrupt.
okay, the ram
Yes.
behind. So
Ram
okay.
seeing behind. Yeah, this is an important point.
Yeah, this is an important
This
point.
is the question I asked last time that I wanted to know.
So the literature says that basically, in his obedience, Abraham has moved into such a position of oneness with God that now he's seeing things as God would see them. And so he's now seeing Isaac as his son.
Mhm.
He's not just seeing him as Sarah's son. He is seeing what a true sacrifice should be, not just Isaac.
Okay.
And so, and if you'll notice, if you go on and read the rest of the story of Abraham, which there's really not a lot, God never speaks to him again.
Right.
And when you think about that, Abraham has just completed the most horrible test that God could ask any father, because he didn't just lose Isaac. I think sometimes in Christian circles, we kind of like, oh yeah, he cast Ishmael out and yeah, good riddance kind of an idea.
Sure.
This was the son Abraham loved. He loved Ishmael. It wasn't just, he didn't feel about Ishmael like we've kind of been conditioned to feel about Ishmael.
Right.
And so he's lost both his kids, or came this close
Right.
to losing.
Right. And something else that again wasn't pointed out to me until I was an adult is that, when it talks about after Abraham dies, that
Mhm.
Isaac and Ishmael bury him together.
Together, yes.
And that's not, that doesn't, that, it seems like, because we've been conditioned to believe that Ishmael was cast out and never to be seen again, never to be heard from. We just don't talk about it. And it's frustrating. We hit the binding of Isaac.
Mhm.
We hit the pinnacle of that story. And then we might talk about Isaac finding Rebekah.
If you're a woman, you get to hear that story a lot.
Well, yeah, I
Yeah.
guess you might hear it more yeah. But, we might hear about that. But often
Jacob's ladder.
we hear about Jacob's ladder.
And then we go straight to Joseph.
but yeah, it's very, yeah, and that's part of the reason we're doing this, because there's a lot of people who just aren't familiar with the stories. Like
Mhm.
you were talking about, I know you were saying when you had students come into your class that they didn't even know their basic Bible stories. Like you said you had one guy, and one of the
One of the Christian
was he one
ministry.
of the pastors who was arguing with you about whether or not, or was that just one of the undergrads, that
Well,
whether or not Adam actually named the animals in the text?
he was an undergrad grad who was already preaching in churches,
Okay,
and
that just blows my mind.
yeah, he's
Like,
like, "No, he didn't." I'm like, "Okay, so we're gonna open our Bibles, page 2," you
right.
know, because
Like
if
just knowing the stories makes it so much better. Like, and the thing is, like, as we're, and again, going back to the conversation, as you're going through stuff, like, just because I'm familiar enough with the stories, I haven't done, again, I didn't do a whole lot of research on this episode. I'm sorry. A lot of it is,
I even
I,
bought him a great new study tool.
okay, a lot of it is I handle more of the technical side. You handle the content more heavily, and after I get my process a little more streamlined, I'm gonna get some more.
Well, and getting past holidays
Yeah,
and
getting through the
birthdays
holidays.
and anniversaries and
Yes, and so once we get some of that, I'm gonna try to bulk up a little more on my content side of things. But the just because I've read through the text and kind of know where the stories are and where they go and have a general idea of the way it flows, as you're going through and pointing this stuff out, I'm like, okay, yeah, I see it, and even I can kind of see some of it before you're
yeah.
getting there. So, and also, of course, part of that's just because we've had some conversations about some of this stuff in the past, but also some of it is because we think similarly on some of this
which
stuff.
is kind of scary.
Right.
Yeah, okay, but I mean, and that's the thing. It is about repetition.
Mhm.
It is about taking the time. I mean, come on, we will sit and spend hours playing the same stupid game on our phone.
Yeah, if anyone's ever downloaded 2048, you know you have to delete it after about 3 weeks
Mhm.
because
Nothing else gets done.
because you have socks to sort.
Yeah,
Something.
at least. And so we understand that repetition makes us sharper, it makes us more efficient at the game, but we are unwilling to actually put the time in with the Bible. I saw a study that said basically if people spent the same amount of time reading as
Mhm.
they did on social media this next year, they could read 200 books.
Oh wow,
And
that's probably accurate.
yeah, and that's not even speed reading. That's not, that's just a normal person's pace. So there's really no excuse. And I know a lot of times we'll do, oh, well, I tried doing my Bible study and I just didn't get anything out of it. You did. If you spent the time to actually read,
Mhm.
you did. And I think sometimes we want this great spiritual high when we get into the Bible. We want to feel like God's presence is looming over us somehow. And sometimes that may happen. Great. More power
Mhm.
to you. If it doesn't, just know that there is value in obedience and there's value in taking time to study his word.
Right.
So,
Right. And that's actually one of the things you're talking about, time and with sometimes with, kids and holidays and stuff will kind of go to the wayside for a little bit. But um Louis L'Amour, Education of a Wandering Man, one of my favorite books.
great book.
I think that book should be required reading at every school.
Mhm.
Um,
I agree.
I do. I think it should be because it's written. It's kind of a memoir, but it's a lot of his views on education,
Mhm.
and he talks about just having time to read. In the back of the book, he's got pages and pages where he kept a log of books he read just while waiting on people to show up somewhere. Like he
Right.
had his book with him, and if he showed up and someone else was late, or if he showed up early, he would read when he had the chance. And again, reading, and I don't know if we've mentioned this on the podcast, but reading is a skill like anything else.
Mhm. Mhm.
And Louis L'Amour talks about this too. You have to practice it. The more you do it, the faster you get, the better you get, the better your retention is.
Your
And
vocabulary
your
grows.
vocabulary, your vocabulary grows. Just reading better material, and start with something simple that you like. If you're not a avid reader, I mean,
Mhm.
find something that interests you. That's the main thing. It can be a technical manual. I don't care, but as long as you practice reading, I mean, because I know guys who would rather read a technical manual than read a novel, and I get that. If it's something that interests me, I can read tech manual. I can read tech specs on audio gear all day. That's just.
We'll pray for your deliverance.
but you have to practice it, and so yeah, time is the time is finding the time is really just taking that little bit of effort to have it planned into your day somewhere.
Well, and I will even, because we talked about some of this last night, reading right now is kind of hard for you because you do have 2 kids.
Mm-hmm.
You've got that thing that our father had where you sit still, you fall asleep.
And I think a lot of that's just my work schedule and the season with the kids.
Yeah. But you've found other ways to supplement not being able to read. So listening to a good podcast.
Yeah, listen to a quality podcast.
Like, Faith and Other Oddities.
If you can find one somewhere.
But, and we do try to recommend the podcasts that we enjoy so that you don't just have to listen to us all the time. And it's all about taking advantage of the chance to learn in car drives and mopping the kitchen floor with your earbuds in or doing the dishes. All of this stuff. It's just another way to take advantage of the chances we have because, good grief, we live in an age where I can hear an Oxford professor lecture in OK, Oklahoma in a camper in the middle of the woods.
For free.
Anytime I want to. Guys, that's cool. And that's amazing. And we need to be taking advantage of that. So
yeah, I'm not going to harp anymore on education.
Yeah,
I think I did some in the last episode too, but that's one of my biggest.
We're huge
peeves.
on that. Yeah, that's a big thing. Well, that's why we're doing
hobby
this.
Horse. Just get educated.
We're going to drive it into the ground.
So,
but yeah,
moving on.
This is why we're doing what we're doing. And so anyway, both stories also end with the boys receiving a blessing.
Okay.
And so these are ways that they're very much like, oh, and the final little, it's not necessarily in the story. Someone really wants to talk to me. It's not necessarily in the story. It is with Isaac. It's actually going to be a couple of chapters later, and they both find a wife. So that's in there. Okay. So what's funny though was when you put them together in the center of both stories, depending on, like we talked about how the chiastic structure, it kind of depends on where you begin and end, where your center point falls. Just as long as you have the points that can line up on either side. In the middle of Hagar and Ishmael's story, if you remember, the center point was the angel calling out to Hagar.
Right.
And if you look at, I have more notes here than I thought. If you look at the situation where with the message to the angel to each person, they're exactly the opposite.
Okay.
100% completely the opposite. The first thing it does is they tell you, the angel tells Hagar, do not be afraid.
Sure.
The angel tells Abraham, now I know that you fear God. So Hagar fears negative, with Abraham fears positive. That I haven't got to take that apart, but I thought that was...
and I think it's a difference between fearing God and fearing death. I mean, it's probably where you're placing that fear is, because Hagar was afraid of death,
and not even her own death,
and afraid of her son dying, losing her share in the promise, which was not explicitly given to her at that point.
Right.
Was just assumed to be part of Abraham's household. And then even in spite of Abraham and Sarah casting the kid out, God still says, no, you're still Abraham. He's still Abraham's son.
Right.
And he's still going to be a great nation.
Because I'm wondering, I mean, Abraham never really, in his prayers and talks with God, he's worried about Ishmael. He's never worried about Hagar. He is worried about Ishmael. God remembers Hagar and tells Abraham, hey, I'm going to do this for her to make sure she's taken care of. I don't think there's ever a promise directly given to Hagar.
Well, no, that's what I was saying. Yeah. That's why I was saying that the promise after they're cast out, it was never explicit to her, but it was given to Abraham that his children would be great, and she was probably taking it as implied that if she remained part of Abraham's household, that Ishmael would be the older son. Because at that point, it's not spelled out that Isaac's going to be the one. At least it may not be to Hagar.
Right.
And so she may still be thinking that Ishmael's going to be the greater son because he is technically older. And by law and by tradition, it would have been Sarah's son technically, so still would have been the older son.
Yeah, Sarah's son would have still been the older son because we know in Hammurabi's code, the sons of concubines, which this is all happening at the same time. So that's a lot of people don't realize this is where that kind of fits into the historical record. The son of a concubine could not inherit with the son of a wife unless the father specifically decreed that it would be so.
Okay, and so that kind of answers our question there.
Yeah. So
and then you have God coming in and saying, "Okay, Abraham didn't speak the blessing over Ishmael, but I'm going to do what he should have done."
Okay, so that brings us to another very interesting point. Abraham never blesses either of his sons. He's the only patriarch who never blesses his sons. And we know that with Isaac giving the blessing, that becomes a huge part of the Jacob and Esau. Jacob blessing his sons, and then their sons continuing with the blessing. This blessing of the father becomes very crucial, and Isaac is the one that starts with. But that goes back to the idea that only a father can bless the son. Well, who blesses Isaac? God.
Yeah.
And last week we talked about there's no record of Abraham and Sarah actually procreating with or having sex to have Isaac. That's left out.
Right.
Even though it's mentioned in the story of Hagar and Ishmael. So.
But we still have God giving the blessing to Ishmael.
We do have God, yes.
Which would have been him stepping in and cleaning up what Abraham should have done.
Yeah, Abraham, and I think that's what we got to remember about Abraham, because, we do have the episode, Abraham was kind of a jerk.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the things that we have to remember about him, that yes, he does some stuff that is very jerk-like, but he's coming out of a culture that he's just being a guy.
Right.
He's not doing anything wrong according to what he has known up to this point.
Right.
Now, there's had to be some understanding of God. Okay. Because now I've got like 20 points rolling in my head. There has to be some understanding with God, because when he sacrifices for Isaac, the ram instead of Isaac, he's actually fulfilling the promise, or the command in Numbers, I believe it was, where the firstborn belongs to God.
Right.
And so he's redeeming his firstborn son, which becomes a part of the Jewish tradition. And the thing is,
he's instituting that, or he's acting, even though it's not instituted yet. That becomes the foreshadowing of that law.
Right. And so we have him. There's some aspect, because the belief in Judaism that the Torah has been pre-existent. And it was only through the Torah. Okay, listen to the wording. It's only through the Torah that the world was created.
Right.
And the world was created for the revelation of the Torah. And the Torah, and now we start getting into language that sounds very similar to John 1. John 1 and Torah and Logos, and there's actually a lot of writing out there whether Torah and Logos are actually interchangeable.
Right.
And so that makes things really interesting, because now if that is the case, and then I didn't plan on going here, but this is us.
Yeah, might as well. We got time.
Yeah, if this is the case, that Torah and Logos is interchangeable, the angel of the Lord is the embodiment of Christ in Abrahamic times, then Abraham did in fact know the Torah.
Right. But you also have the distinction between the eternal Torah and the written Torah. The eternal Torah, which would have been the laws of the universe that God constructed the universe out of. Then you have the written Torah, which is the kind of dim revelation of what the eternal Torah would be. But then if you have the theophany, or of Jesus there, that would have been, Abraham would have known the eternal Torah, not the
written.
not the written Torah.
It was interesting because I was listening to a rabbi teach this week, and he said that the higher Torah was not meant for the people of Israel because they couldn't handle it. That the original stones in which God wrote the commandments with his finger, they couldn't handle it. That they had to have the broken, rewritten stones. That was all their humanity could bear.
Yeah. Now, there's another rabbinic teaching which I think is just amazing, and this I know that this fundamentalists hate this, but there's a belief that the Torah was not as perfect. The one that this is kind of mirroring what you said. This belief that the Torah was not as perfect when Moses carved it out versus when God carved it out, and because of that, its application is not evident at all times. And so then you have to wrestle with it, and that's where you get the midrashim, is those rabbinic discussions and the oral Torah and the working it out, and that is mirrored in Jacob wrestling the angel,
which would be actually Jacob wrestling
with God,
wrestling
with
the
Jesus,
Torah, with wrestling with the Torah. Oh my goodness!
So,
okay,
so it really, it's like, it's funny because
we didn't, but this stuff was not been anything we went over, by the way.
Yeah, no, this is all free. But the it's like, it's funny whenever we get to talking about this stuff. The image I often get of these different ideas, we talk about paradigms and lenses, is like the watchmaker glasses that have like the different lenses you can like flip in, and it's like, that's what I think of every time. It's like, oh,
got another one here.
Think of Brian Regan. He has a joke about having trifocals. He's like our friend's got trifocals. He's like thinking about seeing stuff. It's like, it's a bird, it's a plane, it's Alpha Centauri. Like talking about like the different levels of vision. But yeah, but no, I think of like flipping different. It's like, oh, we're okay. Or even if you were doing that with like, because there are some telescopes that have lenses that flip in and out like that, like they're fancy and stylized. But it's like, oh, well, we put these two together, we can see for a mile. We put these two together, we can see for 5 miles. We put this one on, we can see to the moon.
Because you said telescope and I went kaleidoscope, and oh yeah, I've seen those. And I'm like, no, different. But that's how my brain works, like a kaleidoscope.
Yeah, I understand that.
Okay, so all of that, and I want to get kind of, we're going to pull in the rest of my notes, and then we're going to wrap it up before we come back to how Christians have read the Binding of Isaac, because it does serve as a type. But
now we're going to talk about how Christians have how modern Christians read it, or how it's been interpreted through the church fathers and Christian tradition.
Yes.
We're going to compare and contrast those.
And probably not formally, but we're going to pull out some of the major ways that Isaac does serve as a type. But
sure.
And we're going to say that for next episode. So there's your teaser for that, because Isaac does work as a type, and it's one of the few times that you're going to hear me go, there's no way else to read this, and I don't have a problem with people picking this up as a type. So the angel is talking to Hagar, and when it talks to Abraham, totally different language. With Hagar, there's never once a mention of God, whereas with Abraham, the angel kind of gives an overview of Abraham's relationship with God.
Okay.
The angel talks about Ishmael's future with Hagar. It talks about Abraham's past. So, everything total counterpoint to. The angel tells, and I think that this was just beautiful, the angel tells Hagar, hold the boy by the hand.
Okay.
So touch positive. With Abraham, he says, withhold your hand. Do not touch.
Okay.
And so, those two moments with the angel for both of these become the pivot. That's when everything changes in the story. And no longer is Isaac going to be a sacrifice. No longer is Ishmael going to die in the desert. And, and for the little final cherry on this cake, now that Abraham has a son who is going to follow in his footsteps and can continue the claim on the land of Canaan.
Sure.
Now we have the creation of sacred space.
Okay.
And in this creation of sacred space that can be maintained by humanity, now we have the final day of the creation account, according to Jewish teachers.
Okay. Yeah, I remember you mentioned that a few
Mhm.
days ago. So that is, so you're saying whenever there's a place for God to enter into creation is when creation's complete.
Yeah, and they see this as the beginning of that, because Adam had a sacred space, he lost it, he gets cast out of it.
Mhm.
And then from that point on in the Bible, every time something's being done in the world, there's God's having to step in to say, no, I'm still the one in charge. I'm still the one who's in control. And Isaac is the one who's going to voluntarily say, God's in control. And Abraham is already doing this. And so
I have so many questions that I will probably get to about that on the next episode.
yeah, but yeah, it's only until we get this lineage. And really, when you think about it too, with kings, you can have a warlord, you can have a tyrant.
Mhm.
You don't have a king until he has a successor.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So you've got to have that in place in order to have.
So it's when God establishes his people.
Exactly.
He establishes Israel.
Yeah, and he gives them a home.
or establishes the lineage of Abraham.
Mhm.
I don't know why I always want to keep calling him Abram, because at this point he's Abraham. But by the time God establishes the lineage, okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and it just, now the story's deeper. It's not just this account of people doing random acts of chaos. There is actually a purpose behind taking the son up to the top of the mountain, and the purpose is it's to show that Abraham has now brought himself into alignment to the point that he can turn loose of everything and still trust God to bring about his purposes.
Right.
And before this, I mean, you think about it, Abraham was manipulating, he was scheming, he was making bargains with people he shouldn't have been making bargains with. He had some good moments in there.
Right.
But then most of the time, he doesn't trust God to be able to completely fulfill the purposes, even when the test wasn't this big.
Sure.
So this is really where we're at. And it is that polemic that you mentioned against child sacrifice, but it's even beyond that. So that's kind of where I'm thinking we ought to wrap up.
Yeah, we
this
should
week.
probably wrap up this week there. That was I enjoyed the show. I hope you did too. That being said, thank you so much for listening. If you want to be part of the conversation, hit us up, Raven Creek SC on all social media. That's on Twitter,
Instagram, Twitter, Facebook.
Yeah, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all the social media, Raven Creek SC. And then on ravencreeksc.com, you can find us there. If you really like the show, comment, write us a review, hit subscribe, come back and see us. Y'all come
share.
back now, you hear? And then if you really like us, hit us up on patreon.com, Raven Creek SC, and we're going to be formulating new and fun ways that we can reward you, even more than just a show.
Absolutely.
Because the show is its own reward. But
For us.
Yeah, we're having a great time. We love doing this, but we want to be able to do it full time eventually. So, but we will be thinking of some fun ways we can reward you for helping make the show go.
Absolutely.
Thank you again, and come back next week. Have a great week. We'll see you later. Bye.
You've been listening to the Faith and Other Oddities podcast, a Raven Creek Social Club production. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you like what you've heard, please write us a review on iTunes or consider supporting us on patreon.com/RavenCreekSC. As always, thank you for listening, and don't forget to join us next week.